Hi folks, and welcome to BreakingWoke, how to identify, debunk, and dismantle dangerous ideas. I'm Douglas Kruger, the author of the global new book, Political Correctness Does More Harm Than Good. I contend that political correctness exists on one side of a spectrum and the truth exists on the other. The casualty of political correctness is truth. Today, let's look at how that is literally true in the world of science. We'll look at 7 ways political correctness is anti-science. First one. It leads science toward what it wants and away from what it doesn't. It creates narratives, and even when the findings are then withdrawn, the narratives remain. Here are 2 quick examples of this one. In 2015, there was a study in Current Biology. The study found that children raised in secular, non-religious homes were more empathetic than religious children. Or, stated differently, religious children are much meaner than atheist kids. This was publicized around the world, and there were hundreds of articles as a result of that idea. Now here's the problem. If you go to the Current Biology website and you look for that study, as I have done, you will find that it has been removed. There were several things wrong with it, and it was retracted after the peer review process. So here's the first part of what went wrong with it. They used Islamic Middle Eastern families as the religious group, and they used secular Chinese families as the secular atheist group, and those were the 2 groups that they compared. Once they controlled for cultural differences between Islamic Middle Eastern Arab families and Chinese families, the differences in empathy between the 2 sets of children disappeared. So that disproved the entire thing. But I think you can see that there's more of a problem to that study. When it is publicized and published around the world in Western nations, what does it covertly imply? It covertly implies that we've gone into a place like Iowa, and we've discovered that Johnny, who was raised in a Christian family, is just mean. He's a little proto-fascist. Whereas, if you go to upstate New York and you find a secular, irreligious family, so much compassion and enlightenment. That's what it covertly tells the world, and it simply wasn't the case. And yet, if you ask people about that study, they will cite it to this day as the standing science. It is not. It has been debunked. This is an example of science asking questions that the politically correct want. In a pluralistic society, can we prove that Christians are awful? Oh, look, we've done it. Except that nothing about that study did what it said it did, and also the study has been retracted. There are many similar examples of this. Take, for example, the idea of the gay gene, the assertion that people are born that way. It is widely accepted that this is what the science says today. As part of the research for my book, I went and had a look at the studies. That is not the case. We don't know. We don't have a clear answer on this one. But the standing, politically correct narrative that it is a genetic thing, that people are born this way, is simply untrue. If you go and have a look for the studies, they have been debunked, and more studies have been done, and those have been debunked, and right now the answer is we don't know. So here's an example of how political correctness puts forward the topic matter that it wants proven, and then steers people away from studying what it does not want proven. When the studies halted on the topic of homosexuality, it was when we started to see that there seems to be a massive correspondence between childhood sexual abuse and homosexuality. Now, do we know if that causes it? No, we don't. However, the statistics for childhood sexual abuse are massively disproportionate to heterosexual people. Is that the cause? Well, the answer is we don't know, because the science has been halted. No one is allowed to study that anymore, which is interesting in and of itself. Now, number 2, the result of this is ideology over investigation. So we have an accepted narrative, we have a publicly accepted ideology, and we are not allowed to follow the truth. That is flaw number 2 in terms of how political correctness is anti-science. Flaw number 3, it indulges in policed orthodoxies and the silencing of dissent. Now that is completely anti-science, and yet ironically, it uses the phrase, "the science has been settled." If you hear someone use the phrase, the science has been settled, rest assured that person does not understand how science works. Science is about the proposal of a thesis and then the vetting of that thesis in order to see if it can be falsified. If it is falsified, then it is discarded. If it is not falsified, it is held to be the contingent and prevailing truth until it is falsified, and in that manner we refine ideas. Now, saying the science is settled is the most anti-scientific thing you can possibly say. Here, let me help you out. Here's the phrase that you're actually looking for. The proper phrase should be, there is a broad scientific consensus. Okay, that's very different to saying the science is settled. There's no such thing as settled science. However, you can only use the phrase broad scientific consensus if there is one. So if there are, for example, hundreds of scientists arguing the other way, then despite the fact that the original group may hold a politically correct or a politically accepted narrative, this is not the truth. This is not settled science, and it is not a broadly accepted scientific consensus. It is a debated and disputed theme within science, and that is not the same thing. Number 3, it engages in facts over feelings. Many years ago, it was very typical to hear people say, I think that. There's been an interesting subtle shift. Today you will hear people say, well, I feel that. I feel that. You're allowed to say, I feel that, but what you are saying, you are annotating the thought that's about to come out with the idea that this is not a fact, this is not thought process or philosophy or reasoning, it is an emotion. Now, of course, what multicultural postmodern relativism teaches us is that all feelings are truth. That is profoundly anti-science. To say, I feel that, is to express an emotion. It is not to express truth or reasoning in any form. Number 4, political correctness has sacred cows and areas that are off limits. Don't follow the truth because we might not like the outcome. This is social pressure over intellectual discovery. Now, imagine if you had to go back a few hundred years. Take an example of a philosopher like Kant. Kant was deeply concerned that reason would undo Christianity. Now, we can get into that one, and there are many reasons why he needn't have worried about it. But essentially what he did was he tried to come up with a way to fortify faith against reason. And he detached the outside world from the inside world and made it, well, he thought he made it impossible to attack faith. What a bizarre thing to do. What if you followed the truth instead? Imagine if you go back a few hundred more years and you have people who are trying to propose scientific ideas, but the social consensus is we don't like it. Would you be okay with that? We're doing it again today, and we're doing it in the name of political correctness, not in the name of faith. There is something scientifically wrong with that, and it is deeply dishonest. Number 5, it operates on the principle of inclusion of all rather than exclusion of the vetted. This is an idea, a dreadful idea that Herbert Marcuse proposed, that if we want to live in an inclusive society, we must include everything that includes everything, and we must exclude anything that doesn't include everything. It is the opposite of the scientific formula. The scientific formula vets away everything that doesn't work until we have truth, or at least contingent truth. Marcuse's proposal for academia, which unfortunately has been taken aboard, is the exact opposite. It says, include everything, and if something tries to vet or to exclude something else, you must kick it out. Well, that's a downward trending funnel that goes to the lowest common denominator and away from knowledge. It is anti-science. Number 6, political correctness indulges in the postmodernist notion of many truths over singular truth. Science vets toward singular truth. It cannot and does not allow of multiple truths. Those are called feelings. They are emotions. They are not the same thing as science. And number 7, political correctness is premised on the foregone conclusion that equality is the highest value. Why? This is a very curious idea to arrive at in secular thinking. To look around and say, given that we don't believe necessarily in the Christian deity, the Judeo-Christian deity, we're going to say that equality is the highest value, and we're also going to call ourselves the people of science. Well, if you're actually being scientific, then there is no obvious or inherent reason why equality should have primacy. In fact, if you go by biology and by evolutionary biology, then it's survival of the fittest. If my family eats your family, then we survive. That is not an equality principle. But let's say, for example, that you respond with, we're not animals, there's something different about us. Well, I would agree with that, and I'd say you're now trading firmly into Judeo-Christian human exceptionalism and the idea of being made in the image of God. But let's say that you don't go that far. You simply say that we are not animals. We are able to practice science. We are human and we have moral value systems that work for us, even if they're just social value systems. Great, okay. So why equality? Why not, for example, a different moral value system such as truth? Isn't science the search for truth? If equality is at odds with the idea of seeking the truth, then you have a problem on your hands. One of these must prevail. They can't both prevail at the same time. So those are at least 7 ways in which political correctness is anti-science. I have a proposal for a much better concept. Seek the truth and speak the truth. You can do it with kindness, you can do it with empathy. When you do so, it helps people, it sets people free, it provides real answers. But not to seek the truth and not to speak the truth in the interests of being politically correct is anti-science.